presenter, one of the great teachers, one of the great humanitarians, one of the great scientists, one of the great human rights activists, one of the great environmentalists on this planet, one of the most powerful voices on earth, Jane Goodall. We all know her to be a primatologist, but also as a teacher, as an inspiration, as a galvanizer of young people. Her Roots and Shoots program is in 140 countries, probably more now as I speak, 8,000 groups, 150,000 young people, children of all ages. She has the Jane Goodall Institute, which is vast now and continues to grow. And her work has really defined the last, say, 50 years of knowledge of who we need to become as a species to find our natural place in the community of life. So without further ado, let me open the floor, open this wonderful Zoom conference, this interconnectivity of all of us, this moment of being biologically connected in ways we never knew before we were, except Jane knew, on this platform to our friend, Dame Jane Goodall.
Well, thank you, Lynne. And you know, when I hear myself introduced like this, I wonder, who on earth is she talking about? But anyway, I think I need to open this, and it's very appropriate. We're all distanced from each other. And the being that has enabled me to become who I am has a special greeting, a distance greeting. And it goes, the distance greeting of the chimpanzee. So for me, it all started with the chimpanzees. And now here I am, here we are in the midst of this pandemic. And as Jim said, we have only ourselves to blame. This pandemic has been predicted for a long time. There have been previous pandemics and epidemics. And for the most part, these have been because of our disrespect of the natural world, our disrespect of the animals with whom we share this world. We've been destroying, for example, forests. And as we destroy the forests, so animals who would not normally spend much time together are brought closer and closer together. And also animals are pushed into closer contact with humans because we're taking away their land, we're taking away their food. And we are hunting, killing, eating, and trafficking wild animals. And in all these situations, we're creating conditions where viruses and bacteria can spill over from an animal host to a human. In particular, we've talked a lot about this recently, the wildlife meat markets in Asia, cruel conditions for the animals, crowded close together, and often very unhygienic, killed on the spot for sale. And both the vendor and the customer can be contaminated with blood, urine, feces, and so on. A perfect environment for the viruses and bacteria to spill over. The bushmeat markets in Africa, animals being sold alive or pieces of dead undercooked meat. And again, it's a perfect situation for this spillover. And don't let's think for a minute it's just Asia and Africa. What about the terrible factory farms where we can find billions of farm animals all over the world now in the most horrendous conditions, concentration camps for animals, just so that we can eat their meat. And these factory farms also create the kind of conditions where a virus or a bacteria can spill over. And this has happened. It's happened in Asia, it's happened in the United States, and it's happened in the Middle East. So back in the 1960s, the early 60s, science, Western science, and this is very different from the indigenous people around the world and many other religions too, but Western science had decided that human beings were the only beings with personalities, minds, and above all emotions, like happiness, sadness, fear, despair, grief. Well, when I got to Cambridge and was told these things, I thought back to my childhood teacher, a wonderful teacher who taught me that this simply wasn't true. And although I hadn't been to college, and although I was now faced with a PhD, and although I was nervous of these professors, that teacher came to me and enabled me to stand up and say, no, we are part of the animal kingdom. We are not separated from it. There is not a difference of kind between us and them, but only of degree. That teacher was my dog. And so today, science is teaching about animal personality, mind, intelligence, and certainly emotion. Students can study these things. We have no excuse. These wild animals and these domestic animals are individuals. They're individuals who can feel fear, distress, and certainly they can all feel pain. And when we think about these billions of animals and these wildlife meat markets, we think about a sort of mass of suffering animal. Each of those is an individual. Each one has its own right to life. And we have no excuse for the way that we've been treating them. So, here we are today in the middle of this pandemic. And as Jim says, and as you said, Lynne, it's brought us to a new realization. And I think I was asked to talk about what can we benefit from this pandemic? We have had previous pandemics. We didn't benefit from them. I think it's this pandemic coming in the midst of climate change and species extinction that has made it so different. But why didn't we respond in the same way to the challenge of the climate crisis? Why didn't we respond in the same way to the crisis of animal extinction? Because one thing I learned in the rainforest, where first of all, I felt a tremendous spiritual connection with the great spiritual power, which gives me strength. But I also learned about the interconnection of all living things and the importance of every little species. And each one has a role to play. Each one has a part to play in this amazing tapestry of life. And as you said, Jim, we depend on the natural world. We're part of the natural world. We're not separated from it. Just because we can build cities and we seem able to barricade ourselves away from the natural world, that's not true. We depend on the natural world for food and for water and for clean air and all those other benefits that come from us being part of the natural world. One thing the chimpanzees taught me, the biggest difference between them, other animals, and us is the explosive development of this intellect. We, even more, Jim, than putting people on the moon, we sent a rocket to Mars and a little robot crawled off and has been taking photographs of the surface of the red planet. People used to think maybe there could be life there, life as we know it. Now we know that's not true. So how is it possible that this most intellectual creature is destroying its only world? And I believe it's a disconnect between the clever head, clever brain, and the human heart, love and compassion. And I truly believe only when head and heart work in harmony can we attain our true human potential. So as a result of this coronavirus, the Chinese have now banned the trading, the breeding, the selling of wild animals for food. And recently they've added dogs to that list. And some other Asian companies are following suit. So that's one advantage that's come out. Let's hope that this ban is permanent. Let's hope that we do something about these terrible factory farms. They're on all our consciousness, or should be, for the amount of suffering every day of billions of animals that we put there for our own greedy pleasure. Lynne, you mentioned our Roots and Shoots program. What are we going to do? Because today, this to me terrifying swing to the far right of our governments around the world, of our head politicians. And some of them I know, they're just raring. They've got the bit between their teeth. They want to get back to business as usual. They want to get back to putting economic development before protection of the environment. I began Roots and Shoots because I met so many young people around the world who had lost hope. And they told me they'd lost hope because we had compromised their future and there was nothing they could do about it. Well, we've been stealing their future. We're stealing it still today. But is it true that there's nothing that can be done? I believe, and I think all of you believe, we have a window of time. And if we get together and if we take action, like planting 1 trillion trees in this window of time, which by the way is closing all the time, then we can indeed start to heal some of the hurt that we've inflicted and slow down climate change. The main message of Roots and Shoots is that every individual makes a difference every day. Every day we live on this planet, we make some impact. And probably everybody listening today is able to have the luxury of making ethical choices in how we live each day. What do we buy? Where did it come from? How was it made? Did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals? Is it cheap because of child slave labor? But the people living in poverty, the billions of people still living in poverty, in spite of all the grand millennial goals, they have no luxury of a choice like that. They have to cut down the last 3 in order to grow food, in order to survive, to fish the last fish, to feed their family. And so we're challenged now as we take action to move into this different world that we all want so badly. We're challenged to alleviate poverty. As I think it was you, Lynne, who talked about the unsustainable lifestyle. We certainly have more than we need. And many people have more than they want. Who needs 3 houses, 4 houses? Who needs a yacht? Who needs a private plane or 2 private planes? Who needs a wardrobe full of clothes that you throw away when you've worn them once or twice? None of us do. I wish I was an animal with fur, and then I wouldn't need any clothes at all. So we must think about our population growth. And I know it's politically insensitive to mention it, but there's 7.2 billion of us on the planet today, and already in some places, natural resources are being used up faster than nature can replenish them. It's predicted in 2050, there will be 9.7 billion. What's going to happen? And by the way, this is not any slur against people in Africa, Asia, and so on, because one child in an affluent family uses up so many more times the natural resources than one child growing up in a poor village in Africa or Asia. We're all responsible. We all need to think about it. The Jane Goodall Institute is doing its bit. We are alleviating poverty around chimpanzee areas in 7 African countries. And it's working. It's making a difference. We've got villagers who were angry that we came in to study chimpanzees and cared more about animals than them. Now they understand saving the natural world isn't just for wildlife, it's for their own future. They've become our partners in conservation, and they've been given cutting edge tools to conserve their own environment, for their own future. So that's really the message I have today. And I think it's really important for each one of us to realize that we do make a difference every day. And when we get together, as is happening in this, what do you call it? I know, this gathering around the world. If we get together and if we take action, if we roll up our sleeves and do something, then we can indeed change the pattern of life ahead. We can, we must. Let's say together, we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And I just want to say, as someone who has known you and admired you for many decades, that the way you presence yourself in the world, the way you've united your head with your heart is so inspiring. Where our world is infused with cynicism and corruption and fake news and despair and manipulation and all kinds of chicanery. And there are not very many people that any of us can point to that are beyond reproach. And you're one of those people. And I just want to acknowledge you on behalf of us all. I mean, in a fundamental way, you're a paragon, but you're also the mother of us all. And I just want to thank you from my heart, and I think the hearts of every single person here, to yours, for everything that you've done and continue to do so selflessly for the hope that we all see embodied in you for the human future. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I don't deserve all that, but thank you.
You do. As we turn to the next speaker, I just want to preface this by saying that in the lockdown, I went through a thought experiment. And I thought, if there was one organization that could really make a difference, if it really came together with intention, what organization would that be? And if you think about it, the one organization that has aggregated the most significant power, resources, capacity, and outreach is the World Economic Forum. It stands unique in all the world in its capacity to convene. And I wanted to just bring this up about the World Economic Forum because it's the World Economic Forum that's taken on the initiative to plant 1 trillion trees, among other projects. It's important for us to understand, particularly in light of what Jane just said and what was said before, that in order for us to succeed in a planet spinning out of control, we have to have mechanisms of strategic effectiveness at every level, at governmental level, international organizations, organizational level, corporate level, mass cultural levels. And the World Economic Forum has mastered many of these mechanisms of influence and power. And so I'm very honored to welcome Nicole Schwab, who is the co-director of the platform to accelerate nature-based solutions for the World Economic Forum, who was there at the genesis and has been participating in the Trillion Tree Project, and will also be sharing other things in which she and the forum are now engaged. Nicole, thank you for joining us. We welcome your remarks.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be part of the Humanity Rising opening, particularly also to speak after Jane Goodall. Jane, you're such an inspiration. And I want to say upfront that you were behind the little spark that ignited, as you know, the Trillion Tree Project, with your plea to protect the old growth forests. And the Trillion Tree Project is not just about planting, but it's mostly about protecting the old forests and, more than planting, growing, restoring ecosystems. But I'll say much more about that. I want to start maybe by saying a little bit why why the World Economic Forum now? And I actually only joined 3 weeks ago, the World Economic Forum officially. I've obviously been involved for a long, long time. But I do feel that this is a unique moment. It's a moment where we can really bring, what we call the different stakeholders together in a way that hasn't been done before. And we're in a time where we see a lot of polarization in our world. The extremes are coming up on all sides. And at the same time, there's an opportunity to unite and to be more inclusive and to go against this extreme polarization, to unite the head and heart and to find a different way forward. And I truly believe this is possible. The window is closing. The window of opportunity is closing to really shift the trajectory we're on, but it's still open. And I would say that the dream that guides me was inspired by a dear friend, Claire Dubois, founder of Tree Sisters. And she talks about a restorative species. And it's a dream that I find extremely inspiring, because what if we could conceive of ourselves, the human species, as a species which is not depleting and destroying, which does not need more than one planet to survive. And we're always kind of thinking, how are we going to fit sustainability into our economic agenda? What if we turned it around and we conceived ourselves as a restorative species that restores, that regenerates, that gives the earth the space and the time to regenerate its ecosystems if left alone? So this is really what is inspiring me. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at the World Economic Forum and the Trillion Tree projects. But first, I want to start with, where are we coming from and what do we need? And Jane spoke a little bit about it, and I'm sure many of you are aware, but I think there's been so much talk about climate and at many levels. And it's only in the last 2 years that biodiversity has started to be positioned more at the center of the agenda, of the media, of the discussions. And there's been these reports coming out, but I think it's important just to take stock. So where are we? What are we talking about? And we are really in a crisis. I mean, we're in a crisis of major proportions. We have 1 million species that are at risk of extinction. Over the last 50 years, 70% of vertebrates have disappeared, 90% of the large ocean fish, sharks, tuna, etc. We are destroying rainforests, as you all know, clear-cutting forests at the rate of 1 football field per minute. We have altered 3/4 of the land surface on the planet. We have a huge crisis in terms of fertile soil, topsoil, pollinator species, insect species collapsing. So everywhere we look, there's a crisis. But somehow this crisis has not sunk in to our psyche. And I find it very interesting to make the parallel with what happened with COVID, because experts have been warning for a long time about the risk of a pandemic. It was actually, interestingly, the World Economic Forum issues a global risk report every year. And it used to be at the top. And this year, the 5 top risks were environmental, ecosystem breakdown, climate change, extreme weather events, etc. And the pandemic one slipped a little bit lower. But what's interesting is we have known about this, and we know that I think it's 70% of emerging infectious diseases come from the wild. And as Jane said, as we are destroying these ecosystems, the probability that these diseases jump across to humans is increasing. And yet, despite all of this, we were unprepared. We were unprepared, and I mean, as we can see, there's massive implications on supply chains. And some of them, I mean, when I read the articles about what's happening in the US with millions of pigs being killed because, the slaughterhouses have closed. I mean, it's like, how did we do this? How could we, humanity, have created a system like this? I mean, it's really atrocious. And so on every level, we have a crisis, we have a problem, we haven't completely internalized it. And now is the time to take stock and to say, okay, we have to wake up. We have to change the way we are operating on all levels. So I think there's an interesting shift also in narrative. And in the environmental movement, a lot of us, we were looking forward to 2020 as the super year for nature, as the year with all these international conferences, the UN Convention on Biodiversity, the climate change conference, the taking stock of the SDGs, the Ocean Summit, the IUCN World Congress. So, I mean, all these massive international events to really talk about what's the international architecture we want to set, what are the targets for the next decade that will allow us to be on a sustainable trajectory with all the complexities of the UN system and of these international agreements. And now everything has been postponed. And a lot of people are saying, oh, well, you know, it's no longer the super year for nature because our attention now has been diverted to health. But actually, if we think about it, human health is a mirror image of our planetary health, and both go hand in hand. And we cannot address one without the other. So I would say it's still a super year for nature, as long as we use this opportunity to make a shift at a much deeper level. And why at a deeper level? Well, because we can act on international architecture, we can set targets, we can lay out pathways of transition, and I'll share all of that as well. But ultimately, it is about how we conceive ourselves, how we position ourselves, and do we continue to place money at the center of our activities, or do we place life? And I mean human life, but all of life forms and the earth. So all that being said, let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing at the World Economic Forum. We've created this platform just a few weeks ago for nature-based solutions. And nature-based solutions is a terminology that is positioned to build this link between climate and nature loss, climate and biodiversity. I mean, between these two challenges, and really bring this into the dialogue to say, we cannot just talk about climate. I mean, we have to talk about the nature crisis every single time we talk about climate, and we have to address both at the same time. And when we talk about nature-based solutions, and maybe I should have started with the definition, what we mean is the protection of our ecosystems, the restoration of our ecosystems, and the sustainable management of our ecosystems. And we talk about solutions because there is this bridge with climate, because we know that these solutions, by protecting and restoring our ecosystems, we can solve 1/3 of, I mean, we can address, let's say, 30% of the actions that are needed to put us on a trajectory of 1.5 degree warming over the next decade. So this is where we're coming from. And then the question, so what's included in that? Like, what does that mean practically? And here I would, again, talk about these 3 different levels of action. So one is this international architecture and changing the narrative. Very often, biodiversity, nature has been positioned on the sidelines and kind of trying to convince economic actors to take this seriously. Now is the time where we're flipping this around. We know that nature has been providing free services. I mean, if we call them free services, from pollination to water filtration to all these things that we take for granted that the economy does not count. And these free services are estimated at $125 trillion. That's twice the global GDP. So we have built our whole economy on a system that does not account for $125 trillion and assumes that these are free, and therefore that there's no end, right? They are limitless. And now we're coming to the realization that this is not working. So the first thing we have done with the World Economic Forum is to start to publish a series of reports looking at the economic and financial case for biodiversity, for nature, to reposition the dialogue and to start to make material, if we can say so, the destruction of ecosystems. And the first report showed that $44 trillion, so that's half the global GDP, is at risk from nature loss. So this is direct risk to the economy. And today, when we're seeing what's happening with COVID in terms of business challenges, job loss, what this actually entails is becoming even clearer. I mean, this risk, it's not abstract. It's about people's jobs. It's about incomes. It's about livelihoods. So that's the first thing. Second, we know that if we want to get ourselves on a sustainable trajectory, there's the protection and restoration of ecosystems, which I'll talk about afterwards. But there's also, how do we stop nature loss? And we know that there's 5 sectors of the industry that have the greatest impact on nature loss. And these have to do with food and land use. So, fisheries, forestry, agriculture. It has to do with the built environment, and it has to do with extractives, with mining. So we're in the process of publishing a second report that's looking at these areas, and that's proposing 15 industry transition pathways. So how would business have to transform to completely shift its way of operating to get on a nature positive trajectory, which means, again, we're not destroying, we're actually restoring. And then finally, there's a whole piece around financing for nature, because that's a whole other component. And at the moment, we have subsidies that give incentives to destructive practices. So how do we start to shift the whole dialogue, and how do we shift the financial flows to accompany this transition towards a nature positive one? So that's, if you want, the more business and financial aspect of it. And then there's a whole stream of work around the Convention on Biodiversity. So I said before that we have altered 3/4 of the land, and we know that only 45% of our ecosystems are still in what is called a natural or semi-natural state. Most scientists have argued that we need half the Earth in a natural state in order to be able to sustain life and to sustain the rich biodiversity of life that actually provides for us. But we're already below that. And at the moment, only 15% of land and 7% of oceans are protected under marine protected areas and parks. So we need an agreement that raises the ambition, and we need to set aside at least 30% of land and oceans by 2030 as one of the targets that needs to be enforceable across the world. And this is somewhere where citizens can play a huge role in terms of advocacy and in terms of demanding that we focus on this protection at the same time as we go ahead these other trajectories. So with all that, I'm going to now go to the Trillion Tree Project. So the Trillion Tree Project, it's really a platform, and it's not that the World Economic Forum is intending to plant any trees or restore any trees or protect any trees, but we see ourselves as having the ability to connect different actors to increase the scale and the speed with which we need to work on restorations. And trees are magical for many reasons. They offer, so many ecosystem services, and I don't even want to use this language because actually they're mystical in many ways, and that's a very economic language. But we know that we need trees. Trees can provide a solution to part of the climate challenge. Trees are essential for water retention. They're essential for climate regulation. They're essential to harbor the biodiversity of life, the chimpanzees that Jane welcomed us with the chimpanzee call. So trees are really a critical piece of this whole puzzle. And we know that these ecosystems are at risk as well. If we keep losing the Amazon, there's a tipping point where the whole Amazon may turn into a savanna. So again, there is a huge urgency. And the Trillion Tree Project has 3 pillars. The first pillar is we want to engage corporations into setting ambitious goals for forest conservation and restoration, and then connect these with the reforestation movement on the ground. So the first is raising ambition. Second, raising ambition among the public bodies, among governments. And again, creating this constellation where the World Economic Forum has an advantage because these are players that have traditionally been engaged, and where we're going beyond what the World Economic Forum has usually done is to connect with the grassroots communities, with the indigenous communities, with the myriad actors that have been in the reforestation movement for decades, and to really address some of the gaps. So connect the dots between that and large-scale commitments, which hopefully can unlock also large-scale financing. And then in the middle, to address policy gaps and innovation and technology, and to have dialogues between these different actors so that we can really identify where the stumbling blocks are and facilitate solutions through technology, through policy levers, and so on. So that's the second pillar. And then the third pillar is this massive movement. And within that is I'm going to go back to what I started with in terms of the restoration species. Can we also talk about a restoration generation and empower young entrepreneurs, channel this incredible energy? I mean, Jane, you talked about it with, you know, youth. I mean, children. It starts very early, but can we empower this generation to be a reforestation generation, to be an ecosystem restoration generation, and provide them the tools to make a livelihood that is not centered around profit making, but around life and restoring life and honoring life. So this is, if you want, in very broad strokes, what we're working on. It's obviously very ambitious, and we see ourselves as a platform to actually catalyze and help the efforts of all those who have incredible experience in this field. And we're working with the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, which also is very much focusing on all these elements, and particularly unlocking, you know, a youth movement around restoration. All the big actors. I mean, it's where can we help? And we want to be inclusive, and we want to be responsive and identify the levers that will have the most impact, because we don't have a lot of time and we have to reach a scale that we haven't reached until now. So I think that's already quite a big program. And I want to end by talking about trees. And I think that, you know, trees are a doorway. There's such wisdom in trees that science is now catching up to, and that indigenous peoples have known for a long time. How trees connect underground, how they communicate, how the forest is actually a whole social community, and how, you know, not each tree is unique and plays its role in the whole. And I think there's an incredible wisdom that we can gain from the trees if we connect at a deeper level. And beyond everything I've shared in terms of action pathways, because I think we do need the overall architecture with global targets. We do need business to start to engage in these transitions. We need the youth and the entrepreneurs and, you know, everyone to join the movement of reforestation. But in addition, it's really about the internal shift and about how we relate to nature, how we relate to the earth, and to take this moment of pause to recalibrate and reset, as Jim said at the beginning, and become a restorative species. Thank you very much.
Nicole, thank you. The scope of what you're engaged in is massive, and I am just delighted to my core to see what you and the World Economic Forum are doing. And please know that Humanity Rising stands ready to partner with you and to support everything you're doing, because I can't think of anything more important than the restoration of the biodiversity of planet Earth, at the center of which is the restoration of 1 trillion trees. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for everything that you're doing. I want to now turn to our final keynote speaker. This will be a dialogue actually with Bruno Giussani, who's the global curator for TED, Technology, Entertainment, and Design, which, as you all know, like the World Economic Forum, is one of the most significant, impactful organizations out there. There's probably no one that is more effectively shared ideas that matter than TED Talks. They've been distributed globally. They are highly influential. And Bruno Giussani has been at the leadership of TED for over 15 years. So Bruno, I want to thank you for joining us. And I want to just open by just asking you to share what TED is doing around climate change. I know you're also involved in the Trillion Tree Project. you may want to say something about TED to the audience, but welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jim, and hello, everybody. Thank you, Dame Jane and Nicole, for all your words. Yes, just really 2 sentences about TED. We are a nonprofit global foundation, and as you said, we are probably best known for the TED Talks, the videos that circulate online and are used to share stories about any topic, really, 360 degrees, but stories and ideas that matter and potentially have an impact. And certainly we intend that as a sort of educational project in sharing, disseminating knowledge and ideas. But we don't only do the sharing of videos. Actually, TED is also a platform, as is the word that Nicole used, is a platform that involves a lot of online things, a lot of offline things. We have thousands of local events around the world, and we have radio and television programs, and of course our main conferences and plenty of activities pretty much everywhere where there is a significant audience online, from social media to our own website to big portals around the world, and so on. So last year we started a project called Countdown, which was focused on, it still is focused on climate and the climate crisis. And the basis for this was that climate is, of course, a long-term existential issue, but is also a very urgent issue. You know, the IPCC reports and a lot of scientific research over the last few years have made very clear, and then the Paris Agreement in 2015 kind of institutionalized that you're running out of time. We're running out of time to keep the climate within boundaries that allow, essentially, and I'm really simplifying here, allow for human life to thrive and flourish. And in order to do that, as Nicole quickly mentioned, somehow the goal that has been agreed upon is that we need to cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% from here to 2030, so in 10 years, and then get down to net zero by 2050, and hence we called the initiative Countdown. So a countdown to 2030 and a countdown to minus 50%. Now, we started this last year, and last year was an interesting year because somehow 5 years after the Paris Agreement and 5 years after the establishment of the setting of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, not much action had happened. And then suddenly, in the last 18 months or so before the pandemic, a lot of momentum started building up in many different ways. Science became unquestionable, and events around the world showed the urgency of things. Let's just remind ourselves of the fires in Australia, which right now seem so far, but they were not. They were just 2 seasons ago. And of course, the world youth movement, Fridays for Future around Greta Thunberg and others, and plenty other initiatives. So there was a momentum building up towards this year, towards 2020, which a lot of people in the climate movement and beyond, in the NGO space, in the foundation space, thought would finally be the year where action, serious action on climate, could and would start. And we were part of that. And then the pandemic came and wiped out most of the plans, because now you can't demonstrate in the streets, you can't gather a conference, you can't bring together a summit of politicians and others, and so on. And although we can replace a lot of things with online activities, the effectiveness is certainly not there, or maybe it's not yet there because we haven't learned how to build effectiveness through Zoom in the way we build effectiveness through gathering people. So our project was and is about identifying ideas and scientific breakthroughs and policies and technologies that can have a significant, measurable impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from here to 2030. So really try to accelerate the movement, increase the likelihood that collectively we can get to that. And that's why it's called Countdown. Originally, we were meant to have a conference this coming October, which would have kicked off the project. and of course we have lost that. We have had to cancel the conference. But although we have lost the tool, we are not putting the mission aside. If anything, we're actually upping the level of ambition, because we don't want the climate issue to be lost in the middle of the COVID crisis. Actually, if anything, the COVID crisis should make us, and I hope it's made a lot of people even more aware of our fragility and of the importance of being mindful that as we start walking out of the emergency phase of this crisis, we should really try to avoid sleepwalking into the next bigger one. So our focus has changed a bit because we don't have the conference. But what's going to happen is that in October, we're going to do a big launch, which is the launch of the countdown, which is putting on the table some of the ideas that we have identified. Trillion Trees is going to be one, and starting building up coalitions behind those ideas to actually increase the possibility that they happen, that they can be turned into reality. And these in different fields, covering anything from energy to mobility and transport to materials and the built environment to nature and nature-based solutions, which include, of course, trees and forests, but includes also the oceans and biodiversity, as well as food and agriculture. So that's the plan for the next few months, and then going forward for the next several years.
Thank you. Sounds very ambitious, and we obviously want to support you in any way that we can. You know, one question that I would have, Bruno, given your place, you know, in TED and seeing probably thousands of speeches and talks and ideas, and now going through the pandemic, aware that we're in a situation where the indicators are getting worse, not better, as we've all been commenting. As you look at the issue of strategic effectiveness, whether on the part of the World Economic Forum or TED or Humanity Rising or the thousands of organizations that are out there that have been doing their best, but in a situation where the situation gets worse and worse, as you view it, given the critical nature of our time and that we are in countdown time, what would be your sense as to how we could increase our strategic effectiveness such that we could actually make a difference and turn these indicators around?
Yes, one thing that has always been very striking to me is that if we look around the world, not only among the people who are watching this, but pretty much everywhere, there are millions of organizations and tens of millions of people who are incredibly well-intentioned and are trying to do the right thing. And it looks to me that the number of these people and organizations keeps growing. And yet the major lines on graphs that matter, anything from inequality to poverty to greenhouse gas emissions and so on, they keep going in the wrong direction. So how is this happening? If everybody who is part of those organizations and is part of those well-intentioned people would jump at the same time, we should be able to tilt the axis of the earth. And yet we don't seem to make any significant dent, with some very minor exceptions, in the trajectory of many of those curves. And I think that there are many different things that we should possibly consider of changing. But before I answer that, let me just make a quick preface, because the moment in which we are in now is actually very interesting for thinking about that, for thinking about how do we really create change this time, because the forces against change are going to be very powerful in the next months and years. And even the forces to roll back what has already been achieved. If you look at the situation now, we have basically two schools of thoughts that are starting battling. On one side, you have people who are talking about restarting after COVID. As if we had just temporarily shut down the economic and social engine, and we need to restart it and reestablish as fast as possible the situation as it was before. there's been a lot of suffering because of this pandemic, but essentially this means looking at it just as a parenthesis. And it's not only about profiting from the huge fiscal and financial packages that have been put on the table by governments and national banks, but also there's a temptation to use the COVID excuse to backtrack on regulation, to backtrack on protections, environmental, consumer protection, and others. So that's one force at play. And then there is the other force, the good one, which talks not about restarting after COVID, but about building back better, building back a better world, not the one that we left behind, because we all, I guess, are aware and acknowledge that the virus didn't arrive in a world that functioned perfectly. On the contrary, there was already a long list of big crises before, and somebody has said that COVID can be seen as a truth virus. It has cast a light on what was there before. Now, I heard somebody the other day saying it's like the water level came down on a dam lake, and now you can see what's been hidden behind it, under it, right? The old steeple and the old church and the old village and so on. And I think that that's what happened. So this second school of thought, the Building Back Better school of thought, would like to use the opportunity of the fact that we are all in the same situation, as you said at the beginning, Jim, and probably there is a higher level of awareness, and of course there is a ton of money on the table through the financial and fiscal and economic stimulus packages to use this opportunity to accelerate the transition rather than just restarting as before or even going backwards. We have taught people now to make significant efforts about flattening the curve of the virus. Can we figure out a way to incite people and get them on board to try to flatten the other curve, the curve of greenhouse gas emissions and the curve of climate change? So there are different things that we can think of, and I'm just gonna go through a very quick, superficial list. But I think the first thing to say, and I'm sorry for using a word that probably should not be used in this context, but I think that the general aim of everything we do should be about decreasing the general level of bullshit in society and increasing the general level of care. And if we can just manage to take that as a principle, I think we could already go very, very, very far. The second issue is about we don't need to restore the climate only. We need to restore society. We need to restore politics. Politics seems to have become, essentially a series of managing emergencies one after the other, and this no longer a way to imagine and build a future or a different future, and just we keep going from emergency to emergency. So there is a lot to be invested into redesigning the political system. A lot of people are kind of leaving the political system. They don't vote, they don't engage, and I think that that's a mistake. Only by being engaged in the political system can you participate in figuring out how to redesign it. Then we need to have an integrated approach. I have the impression that for too long we have all been fighting our own specific fight, and somehow the fights were kind of aligned, and so, but we have lost sight of the fact that there is really a big, interrelated fight to be fought, and all these things need to be mutually supporting. We need to adopt an integrated approach. The effort to move the economy and society towards a net zero future, net zero emission future, is not a single project. It is not a series of projects. It's an overall direction of travel, and then a network of interrelated projects and interdependent efforts. So how do we bring all those together? And the last point I want to mention is that we need to shift the focus of who we are talking to. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, but I'm kind of, I started to suspect that the reason why all those people and all those organizations that I mentioned at the beginning that are trying to do the right thing, but they only end up having limited discrete impact and not a real impact on the curves that matter. The reason why they don't have that impact is probably because they are been focusing too much in talking to the converted. So, for example, in the case of climate, I don't think the problem are the deniers, for example, the climate deniers. No, you have an interesting distribution when it comes to climate. You have the converted, you have the activists, you have the greatest, and a lot of people in this talk, in this call, probably everybody in this call, and other and a lot of social entrepreneurs and so. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have the deniers. But then you have this huge number of people in the middle, probably the majority, which includes a lot of us as well, who accept the science, acknowledge the problem, acknowledge the urgency of the problem, talk about solutions, donate to environmental causes, maybe engage in an NGO, but then in daily life we keep behaving as if it wasn't really happening. And I think that that's where we need to start having an impact. If we acknowledge the science, if we know the urgency, if we know the problem, and if we think they want to make an impact, then we need to start making an impact, even if it's a small impact. And I know that the issue feels daunting. How do we change the whole system? How do we change from driving around gasoline burning cars to another kind of mobility when the world economy and the whole world is built around cars and gasoline? But the goalpost keeps moving with every act, and every act is not too small to try to move the goalpost. I give an example, and then I finish on that about moving the goalpost. Imagine a big shipping company. Shipping is one of the most polluting industries in the world. Cruising, so vacation cruises is the equivalent. Is also very, very polluting. But let's stick with shipping. Imagine a big company who owns dozens of ships, and those that carry thousands of containers around the world. And imagine that they come out and say, well, by 2050 we're going to be using only electric ships, and no company has done that yet. But if one that's a significant player would come out with that, it would completely change the game for the whole industry. And therefore completely shift the goalpost. Why? Because although 2050 seems very far away, then you start thinking about the implications of a decision like that. If they want to be electric by 2050, it means that the last ship that they can put in operation that is not electric is probably by 2030. It means that they need to start developing, the industry needs to start developing the technology for electric ships now, essentially. So you kind of, the notion of 2050 starts today, and these movements are happening in many fields right now. And one of the things we want to do with Countdown is try to identify the ones with the best likelihood to have an impact and then accelerate them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is very important for us all to consider as we ponder how we become more effective. So thank you, Bruno.
My pleasure.
Look forward to interacting with you on this. Now we turn back to Lynne, and I just want to very briefly contextualize the next section. I went through a thought experiment as I was in lockdown, and I thought if I was dictator for a day and I could make one decision, what would it be? And my first thought was to order that all the oil stay in the ground. And my second thought was to stop the deforestation of the Amazon. And then I realized that that was stopping a crisis, but it actually wasn't solving a problem, changing the system. So I thought, and what came to me was that if I could make one decision that would be as transformational as the pandemic in a positive way, I would order that in the next 30 days, every government, every organization, every company in the world at the local, national, and international levels be turned over to women, and that women basically govern us at least till 2030. If you think that thought, that would be as transformational as anything that I can think of. I immediately called Lynne to see if she approved. She said it's a great idea. So we thought we would convene this women's circle. And then starting tomorrow, over the next 10 days, we're going to hear from women from literally all over the world and all walks of life. We do so honoring an imperative that I think has risen now to a national security level of empowering women in executive leadership in institutions worldwide. Lynne?
Thank you, Jim. Well, first of all, I love your what came to you. I think that is such a brilliant stroke of your continuing genius to come up with that idea. And so we're going to hear now from 9 extraordinary, phenomenal, absolutely incredible women who did not have to become men in order to achieve what they have accomplished. In each case, the women that you're going to hear from are embodiments of the female archetype that is emerging on the planet today in women, but also in men. They are all extraordinary. They are all what I call the signs of the 21st century being the Sophia century, the century when women will take our rightful role in co-equal partnership with men and the world will come into balance. And I'm going to briefly share a prophecy about this century that comes from the Cherokee people. And I'm going to move back so you can see my arms. So the Cherokee people have prophesied that in the 21st century, something remarkable would happen. They say that the bird of humanity has 2 great wings, a masculine wing and a feminine wing. And the masculine wing has been fully extended for centuries, fully expressed, while the feminine wing in all of us has been truncated, not yet fully expressed, half extended. So the masculine wing in all of us has become over-muscular, overdeveloped, and in fact violent. And the bird of humanity has been flying in circles for hundreds and hundreds of years, held up only fully by the masculine wing that has had to become over-muscular and violent. But in the 21st century, the feminine wing in all of us will fully extend, find its way, express itself. The masculine wing will relax in all of us, and the bird of humanity will soar. So let me say that metaphor as I preface the messages, nuggets you're going to get, because in the next hour, we'll hear from 9 women, 6 of whom have panels in the ensuing days. So you can take a deep dive with 6 of them. But I'll start with the first 3 of the 9 that do not have an ensuing panel for their 5 minutes or so of brilliant nuggets about answering the question that Jim has so beautifully asked us to address, or the set of questions. And let me say what that is. What would need to happen such that global leadership of women is embraced and in practice in the immediate future? What would it look like if the radical empowerment of women were the most critical aspect of any post-pandemic world? From the frame of the work of each one of these women, from Brazil, Australia, India, the Netherlands, China, the United States, South Africa, Iran, and Nigeria, those are the 9 women that will speak. What, from the frame of your work, your worldview, your creative imagination, what needs to happen to create the world we want? And I will start with, from Brazil, Jacqueline Pitanguet. She's the founder and executive director of CIPIA, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting human and civil rights in Brazil, especially among groups historically excluded from exercising their full citizenship. She was in the early governments after the dictatorship from 1986 to 1899. She held a cabinet position. She participated in writing the new constitution for Brazil. She has been the president of the board of the Brazil Fund for Human Rights. She has been one of the most important women in her country, president of the National Council for Women's Rights in Brazil. She is an incredible, deep and profound scholar, intellectual, activist, mover and shaker. Let me turn it over to Jacqueline. Here we go.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here, to be part of this initial moment. And thank you, Jim, and also to be part of this extraordinary group of women with whom we will be sharing our thoughts and moderated by you, Lynne. Thank you so much. Well, when you ask about what role women can play in rebuilding a new world, I would like to turn out and talk a little bit about women. What are we? We are the interaction of biology, of culture, of history, and of context. Those elements, they define us as individuals, but also as a universal category. The interaction of those elements, they place us as actors in the reconstruction of the world, of a new world, of a different world, a more equitable, just, sustainable world. So let me turn to each one of these elements. Biology gave us the capacity to deliver life. So we are responsible for the continuation of the human species. But we also have, with biology, the experience of the generosity of maternity. Culture, throughout the centuries, has placed us as caretakers. Caretakers of the children, caretakers of the elderly, of the ill, caretakers of most of men, with few exceptions. And this role of caretakers is the one that is so prominent, so important now with the pandemic. And women are the majority of caretakers. Caretakers as nurses, as health attendants, as doctors, in the forefront of the struggle, giving their lives for the lives of others, exercising compassion. And let me remember that the countries that have better responded to the pandemic, they are all ruled by women. So I think that Jim's question makes sense. The other element, it's history. Throughout history, women is pictured as having been a passive victim of patriarchalism. But there is a non-written, non-recognized history of women that is a history of victories, a history of struggle, of capacity to strategize and resist and advance. Actually, all we have today was gained. Nothing was given. And we have struggled and still do for the right to have an education, for the right to vote, for the right to have equal pay for equal work, for the right to exercise political power, for the right, I could go on and on and on, for the right to live a life without fear of violence or without suffering sexual or gender violence. And as we go on and on and on our endless struggle, we have to recognize that we have been warriors throughout history, that we have developed strategies and capacity to act and to struggle for a better world, for a world whose foundations are now on sustainability, and on justice and peace. So as warriors and capable of strategizing, we have to be listened now in this moment of reconstruction. And finally, I mentioned the context, because we all live in different contexts. And what I want to point out is that the context of the world we were living on before this pandemic is a context of extreme inequality. Extreme inequality. It's a context of growing radicalism, of growing extreme right governments, of growing environmental degradation, racism, religious extremism. It's a very difficult world that the virus arrived. And this context of inequalities due to social, economic factors, due to race, to gender, inequalities inside countries, between regions, between countries. This is all reflected on the way that pandemic is being experienced. The access to health care, it's unequal. Access to food is unequal. Even access to the right to have social isolation is unequal. And also I want to point out that if poverty was already growing, it will now grow to unprecedented levels, levels that have been unprecedented even after World War. And so we must remember that women have been always, everywhere, the poorest among the poor. And women have been able to multiply the scarce resources in order to guarantee the survival of their families. So women also have the experience of dealing with scarcity.
Yeah.
So to finalize, what I want to say is that in proposing new avenues, new architectures, we come with biology, with culture, with history, in this context of post-pandemic economy, and we must be heard. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline Bitange. What a gift you are to the world, particularly to your country. Now we go to Clover Hogan, who is from Australia originally. She now lives in the UK. She was educated in Indonesia. She worked in Silicon Valley. She's one of these amazing 20-year-olds that is mobilizing the entire world, and she's the founder of the Force of Nature. Take it away, Clover.
Thank you, Lynn. Can you hear me okay?
Jan.
Amazing. So I have had my heart broken twice in a short 20 years on this planet. The first time was when I was 11 years old and watched my first ever documentary about one of the many ways we, as a species, were destroying our home. My childhood was spent in Australia's tropical North Queensland, fishing frogs out of the toilet bowl and dodging snakes that hung from the ceiling. And growing up, nature was never an other. It was my one constant, the fabric of my existence and the precious bubble I lived in, blissfully unaware of the outside reality. The moment that bubble burst was my catalyst, wading through my grief and my despair, a vow to be a voice for the voiceless. Now, the second time I experienced heartbreak was in November of last year, as I watched the place I called home, the place I'd snakes and rescue beach sea turtles engulfed. I watched from afar as my country made, and I sat helpless as 1 billion animals perished, as friends lost their homes, as the smoke in the air worsened my grandmother's asthma, as I realized the place I called home would never again be the same. In 10 years of fighting on the front lines of the climate movement, I have learned one very important thing, And that is that the greatest threat we face is not, in fact, the climate crisis, but our feeling of powerlessness in the face of it. We do not lack the money, the resources, the man and woman power, but the tenacity, the uncompromising resolve to deliver a thriving planet, to become custodians of a future by our own design. We all want that future. We all want to make a difference. Yet in the ravine between wanting to make a difference and taking action live the stories that keep us from fulfilling our potential. Future is out of my control. People who do take action are smarter or more experienced. I can never do what they do. The system is too broken to create meaningful change, and I am powerless to change it. I've heard these stories working in classrooms across the UK through Force of Nature and in boardrooms. The rules of the system make it incredibly difficult to do the right thing, to be responsible, to step up rather than shut down, which is why crossing that ravine might seem like an impossible leap. Yet it starts with a single step, and that step is to ask yourself one question. If I could solve any one problem in the world today, what would it be? When you connect to your feelings, what is the injustice that most riles you up, that ignites that fire beneath your skin? Then imagine what the world would look like without that problem. And as you sit securely in the future, looking back to the present day, ask yourself, how did I step up as a conduit for change? How did I wield my gift in service of a mission greater than myself? The flip side of how royally we've messed up the planet is how many number of ways there are to help it. Climate change is the system of broken systems, from the clothes on my back to the food in my fridge, and before us is the opportunity to rethink every part of how we live and breathe and exist in the 21st century. We all have a problem we want to solve, and we all have the blessing of our own gifts to show up and solve it. You owe it to yourself to act, to stop numbing yourself to the situation, to stop scrolling, to stop buying, and ignoring the internal alarm bells that tell us something is seriously wrong. I used to think that I had to beat those feelings into submission, my grief, my rage, my feelings of loss. Yet as my heart was broken for the second time, as I watched my country blaze, I realized that in those feelings lay my power. To solve our beautiful, bright planet's dark problems, we must look in the face at our grief, of our fear, of our outrage, our despair, and our overwhelm. We must discard the belief that we are powerless and realize that we are infinitely powerful. And we must channel that energy into action, because the world does not need another million words, but the action of one is a million. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful. Wow. Thank you, Clover Hogan. That was Clover Hogan. She's the founder of Force of Nature. We now go to one of the people who is totally unstoppable. Everything that Clover said is a description of how Vandana Shiva has lived her life. She's a scholar and environmental activist, a food sovereignty activist, an anti-globalization activist, an author, a scientist. She's everything everybody should be now to turn the situation around. I turn it over to Vandana Shiva. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, no, you
Okay,
muted
good.
me.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynne. I'm also an ecofeminist. And being an ecofeminist simply means not living under the illusion that the earth is dead, she's inert matter to exploit, and the women are passive. The earth is alive, she's Gaia, and she's very angry. She's in rage. The corona is one aspect of her rage. As her forests are invaded and viruses that belong to animals in the forest becomes pandemics for humans. But it is a result of our invasion and violence. And women, are power in creative form. I don't believe that this short-term militarized way of power as dominating over others, has to be the way we think of power. Nature and women are power in creative form. And the potential of that power is what has kept life going for 4 billion years for the earth. For humans, crisis after crisis after crisis, it's women with their invisible work and their invisible knowledge who have sustained it all. So we don't have to become presidents and prime ministers. We are running the show anyway in places that matter, whether it's in healing or growing our food. Over the last 35 years, I've worked for the protection of the defense of the earth for nearly 5 decades. But over the last 35 years, I've dedicated myself to creating a nonviolent agriculture, because I realized what we call industrial agriculture really came out of war. And it is causing extinction, it is causing climate change. 50% of the greenhouse gases come from a bad food system, which is also ruining our health. How stupid could powerful men become to destroy their own bodies because they looked down on the body and thought we were only body without minds, and they were minds without bodies. These Cartesian divides have to end because they're so unrealistic. This mechanistic thinking has brought us to the brink. Climate change is a ruptured cycle. And I would ask Bruno to stop talking about flattening a curve. If a cycle is broken, you heal a cycle, you don't flatten a curve. That is Cartesian 1 quadrant when you knew four-dimensional space. Saving seeds. We've got seeds that are able to help our people to revive after the cyclone Amphan. Since 99, super cyclone, cyclone after cyclone, women lose everything, but because we save the seeds and we refuse to allow them to be patented, we refuse to accept monopolies, every climate crisis, women bounce back. And their knowledge of biodiversity, their knowledge of ecological agriculture is constantly fresh, becoming more relevant with every pandemic, with every catastrophe. We're growing 2 times the food that the country needs if the whole country did agriculture in women's ways. If the whole world did agriculture in women's ways, there would be no chronic diseases, there would be no hunger, there would be no food deserts. And in the process, we heal the carbon cycle, we heal the nitrogen cycle. Our rural incomes are increasing tenfold, not by chasing the market, but by saying, market, you operate, we'll serve the earth. And that economy of care is actually creating a more robust economy for the welfare of all people. I think we need to be extremely careful about the vocabulary that we create. We do, net zero. Net zero is a nonsensical term when the world is made of living carbon. We have to live in gratitude to the earth and say, you gave us so much. Here is a part to give back to you. And that is what organic farming is. It's paying from my land through Albert Howard to the world in the name of organic farming. The earth, the soil, our mothers, our grandmothers are there to heal us and to teach us for a bridge to the future. Extinction is not inevitable. And for all the grandmen who want to escape to Moon and Mars, escape is immoral. The earth is inviting us to stay home and take care of her, and she will give us everything in abundance.
Thank you, Vandana Shiva. Thank you for your unstoppable spirit and for your words and for your strength and for your inspiration. We move now to Lisette Schutemacher, who is from the Netherlands. She's an entrepreneur, a director, an author. If there's anything in the world she hasn't done, I don't know about it. She's been the chair of the board of the Center for Human Emergence in the Netherlands, has been a trustee of the Findhorn Foundation. She's an impact investor. She's an investor in Ubiquity University. She's an author. Let's hear from Lisette Schutemacher from the Netherlands.
Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, like Jane, it's like, who are you talking about? Let's talk about women, and not only women, but also the feminine that has a part to play. And I believe part of the feminine is being inclusive. So I want to say hi, not only to you, Lynne, and Vandana, and Clover, Jacqueline in our circle, and Jim, but actually to everybody who is here. Let's just take a moment to really be in this together. We're like over 500 people from all over the world coming together because we care. And from all the things you said, Vandana, Shiva, I will pick up on you saying we have to be careful about the vocabulary we're using. And pondering my contribution, I wrote a blog on the Ubiverse and I called it, "We're not in trouble, we're in transition." And I don't mean that flippantly, because I know there's a lot of trouble. A lot of people were already having a hard time and they're having an even harder time. But what happens when I think, and maybe you can just do this little exercise with me, when you feel I'm in trouble, I feel a bit like, you know, a kid caught out. But also I want to get out of trouble as fast as I can. And I will grab what I know in order to get me out of it. But when I say to myself, I'm not in trouble, we're not in trouble, we're in transition, then I know transition comes with trouble for lots of people. But then my trouble, our trouble, have a meaning because we're transitioning to somewhere. We are transitioning, and this summit is a good example of that, to a world that is just, to a world in which we live as part of nature in step with nature. And so I think what the feminine will bring, what women will bring if Jim's wish is fulfilled, is also the inner part, because nowadays this is not only about outer action, it is very much also about inner action. Can we sit with the brokenness? There are so many solutions and they are wonderful, but we also want to sit with what is happening, with the pain, with the opportunity that is given. Because I know from my life, if I grab a solution too quickly, then very often I'm just recreating what already was, instead of truly opening what can be. And I saw someone in the chat talked about visioning. Everything that humans have made comes in some way from a vision. So I would say, women rule. Let us take some time for visioning, for really talking about, imagining the world as it can be. And I learned something. There was a time I wanted to be able to do what the boys could do. I was very much in the masculine wing, Lynne, and I took motorcycle lessons. And I learned a wonderful lesson there. I had to go on this empty parking lot and zigzag through the traffic cones until there was a curb, this stone elevation. And I was terrified with this huge machine to hit the curb. And the instructor said, don't look at where you don't want to go. Look at where you want to go. So with this huge thing, you know, that could go from nothing to 100 immediately, I had to turn my gaze and the whole body followed. And I learned that 30 years ago, and it has served me well. So let us just for a moment, all of us, have a picture, imagine, visualize a part of what is part of the world that we want to go to, that we want to transition into. I believe that is important. I believe that is stronger sometimes than we think it is. So let's just take a few seconds. What is the world you want to live in? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And how do you feel living in that world? Let's go there. Thank you, Lynne.
Thank you. Thank you, Lizette Schutemacher. That way we needed a little break here from all these beautiful messages to digest even a tiny bit. Thank you for that, Lizette Schutemacher. So we're now moving to, not moving to China, but to hear from someone from China, one of the most accomplished young women from that vast country. Yanling Duan is a holonomic innovator. She's the founder of the Davos Block Base Programming Committee and the lead of Davos 2020 SDG Convergence. She's chair of Open Heart Design Alliance. She lives in Zurich, Switzerland. She promotes integration, which we just tried to do a little bit of everything, but blockchain, human connection, and health. Yanling Duan.
Thanks so much, Lynne. 大家好. My name is Yanling. In Chinese, it says 大家好 means hello, everybody. Literally, it goes as greeting to the big family and honor to be part of it. 大家. So just like today, this big family highlights this whole more than the parts. I get the spirit, this human rising community trying to manifest. I would like to invite this big family, just like the previous panelist was mentioning, everyone here in the space and everyone's watching, and all those who are the weavers, helpers, guides, and friends who brought us here in this time and space. And in that spirit, that's kind of the yin and yang. We'll talk about the feminine and masculine about, I guess, and that's the balance we're striving. If we can stand on this both leg and on the platform of trust and gratitude, and that we can hold, then we can shine our individual uniqueness. And that's what we call He. How can we celebrate diversity within the harmony? And because of that spirit that so many conversations I had at gym, I'm so inspired by that spirit, especially this women's circle. I'm here, some sincere gratitude. And I feel it's important for me to share this pod, not because I want to promote any particular Chinese culture. It's just more of being this planetary citizen, and I believe many of us here feel like to be the futuristic innovator, like we're trying to work on the future we want to envision and living in. I'm also a humble student of Tao and carrying the Zhu or ancestral lineage in China. And at the same time, working with pioneering spirits and creative intelligence around the world, I feel I'm obligated to offer this special or unique piece of puzzle when we're looking at a culture. So how can we look at our ancestral wisdoms and timeless wisdom, not only dive into the exotic, but also even take a moment to digest something as mundane as a normal daily word that our ancestor had used and embedded the wisdom in. Like 大家, I don't think most Chinese would ever thought about that as a big family anymore. And just as technology in Latin means art of logic instead of its technical machinery, chill, we feel. So ultimately, I feel this sharing is important to usher into before sharing why we do what we do and what we're really doing, which is always today's become a little bit complicated to explain. And based on that yin yang lag, so our mission in Block Base is to bridging global brain with planetary heart. And the same thing, it's just a different scales. We just have to be careful what we want to scale up to, right? From charities that yin space and yang manifestation, until this building this balanced, great global network of collaboration. It's just a matter of scale, and just a matter of time and efforts and resources, as long as we know the directions, right? So that's what we do. So the principle is still the same, 师法自然. And again, the Chinese word, learning from the 自然, nature. And the concept of nature is not, as we see in English word, saying what is outside of the man-made world, but actually it means so be it, as it is, as yourself. is something even beyond the universe, time and space. So by that principle, I think the English word we can say the biomimicry cultural collaboration. So it's the idea of how we truly respect nature and do everything, including developing business, develop organization as an organism instead of a machine, and incubate like chickens in a farm. So in essence, physically we design spaces that entice inspirations and intimacies, and also instantaneous trust, and which many people experience here in Davos for the 3 years successfully. And also we design the invisible platforms and the in-space, collaborative space that inviting investors, we call it, we code that word investor as not only women, but people embody the spirit of nurturing long-term, invest in the bright future with resources, talents, wisdom, financial resources, anything we have, we see money in that way. And for these two legs, we have an organization in Davos, and this as a global institutions or organism, and gladly join platform like such, because we truly are sitting on this one board platform of trust as the humanity writing, but the rest of we just continue doing. And the entry point we're doing is to tackle into the business world, the leadership practitioners. We believe it also the Chinese principle, if you want to change, you have to change from the within and from the top. So the idea is coding this inner SDG. How can we build this inner connecting, internet, or shifting of human consciousness to reflect and change our outer world? And we take that approach not because climate change and fighting about issues and challenges are not important, but just if we really want to fundamental change something, as a Buddhist monks say, you can wipe the mirrors, but you have to wash your face before, and then the mirror might change and show a better picture. So I'd love to invite every one of us and join the journey of bridging this supposedly interconnected world, and let's usher in the shift and let the outer world mirror that change gradually. And thanks Lynne and Jim for invitation. I'm looking forward to work with all of you.
Thank you, Yanling Duan. So we're now moved to Osprey Orielle Lake. She's the founder and executive director of Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, WECAN. She's from the United States. She works nationally, internationally with grassroots and frontline women leaders, policymakers, diverse coalitions. She builds incredible collaborations. She works very deeply with Indigenous women. That's how I know her. And let's hear from the founder of WECAN, Osprey Orielle Lake.
Hello, everyone. I'm so honored to participate in this panel with so many esteemed colleagues and with everyone who's here today. I feel that in our bones, we knew this time was coming because we could not go on as we were. So it's really good to convene at this critical time. I learned from Pandora Thomas, a brilliant African-American permaculture teacher, about Sankova, which is an African word from the Akan tribe in Ghana. And the symbol of Sankova is a mythical bird with its feet firmly planted forward, with its head turned backwards. And to the Akan, it is this wisdom and learning from the past, which ensures a strong future. And I feel really connected to this perspective because to move forward with skill and to shape the world we dream of, it's vital to speak to the origins and the root causes of this really extraordinary epic moment in human history. A moment in which we need to address that the multiple crises of COVID-19, climate chaos, and many other societal dysfunctions are rooted in the long-standing dominant culture's disconnection and disrespect for nature and each other. And also how these crises are exposing and amplifying systems of injustice and inequities, from colonization to patriarchy, from racism to capitalism. These systems of oppression disproportionately are harming Indigenous people, communities of color, women, and also the land, the earth herself. And often we hear that we are all in this together, but the fact is we are not in this together evenly. So I don't think we can really move forward without attending to root causes and injustices that have been ongoing. We need our governments and societies to fundamentally transform in order to truly care for people and planet. And at WECAN, we're calling for deep systemic change because this is what this almost unimaginable moment is really demanding. And we work with women leaders, as Lynne said, in regions around the world. And I've witnessed how incredibly ingenious women are as they engage in very diverse and successful solutions, from decentralized renewable energy to forest protection and reforestation, from agroecology to advocacy at the United Climate Talks, and I could go on and on. The real problem is not that we don't have solutions, but rather the violent and outrageous structural interference that those in power are exercising in response to people taking power and real action, such as the fossil fuel industry as a big example, and there are many, and the financial institutions and governments who are enabling the fossil fuel industry to continue to pollute while reaping massive profits. They are also funding deforestation. So let's be really clear. There's no way we can succeed in averting climate catastrophe, adhering to the Paris Climate Agreement, without first stopping fossil fuel expansion and the financing of it. So the women in our network is one of the things we're doing, are advocating and campaigning for financial institutions to immediately divest from this industry. And we're also calling for our government to stop bailouts that are going on right now in response to this pandemic to the oil and gas sector, when instead we need to be clearly investing in people and planet. This is a time to radically imagine a world that is healthy and just and invest in that vision. If ever there was a moment for a comprehensive plan that is community-led, now is that time. The time for a global feminist Green New Deal that is led by frontline leaders and invest in this restorative world we want, this regeneration. So as stability in the current system falters and cracks, which it surely is right now, this is actually a time where new ways of visioning can have a considerable impact if we fight for them. Another key component of this new vision that we're working on that's really important is rights of nature. Our current environmental laws treat nature as property, only existing for human use as a commodity. And we really need to get our beautiful living earth, our forests, our waters out of the marketplace and say, our earth is not for sale. Our earth is sacred. And Mother Earth is clearly letting us know that her natural laws are not negotiable. Additionally, some of the most important voices to lift up at this time are women leaders, as this panel is calling for. Due to stark gender inequality globally, women are impacted first and worst by climate change and all manner of crises and violations. Yet at the same time, one of the most inspiring things to know is that many studies have demonstrated that women's leadership is essential for solutions. In fact, we can't even get to sustainability without women. So I invite you to go to our website where there's a plethora of information about why and how women are leading the way, since we can't go into those details right now. But there's a lot of information about this that I think everyone can incorporate into their work. And even now, as has been mentioned, we are seeing that countries that are led by women are responding better to the COVID-19 pandemic with far better success. So yes, this is the time of women rising. And we need to especially center the leadership of frontline women, Indigenous women, and women of color. This is how we're going to win, and this is how we're going to get through this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Osprey Orielle Lake, for your awesome work at WECAN and for those beautiful words. So we now move to South Africa, where Linda Tucker is in her beautiful place in her reserve. She had a career in international marketing and fashion, and she had a really dangerous encounter with a pride of life in 1991, and she was rescued by a Sangha medicine woman. And since then, she's dedicated her entire life to the urgent protection of critically endangered species, particularly the white lions. and the capstone species of the world. So Linda Tucker in South Africa.
Lynn, thank you so much. And I hope that people noticed when I linked up an hour and a half ago that the sun, I'm speaking to you in the middle, but you cannot imagine how many animal calls are united with this effort. We are not alone. Nature is so conscious of what we are. And so although it's dark, calls, this is a sentient world and we have her full support. I'm so grateful to hear from Nicole Schwab that the World Economic Forum has prioritized nature-based solutions. I presented at Blockbase in Davos earlier this year, and it seemed an impossibility to present a sacred finance, Lynn, your area, in that context, in the belly of the beast. And yet here we are. And I was representing a group of the Asagaya Alliance, a delegation of indigenous leaders, scientists, conservationists, enviro lawyers, human rights human rights experts. It was a coalition. And although I've worked, it's been pioneering work on my own for decades, these coalitions are going to represent the key. Only a couple of years back, a coalition of conservation groups that I assisted mobilized a global march in 51 countries for lions. And it was part of a coalition, in fact, probably 6 months ago, that submitted to the South African government warning of a global pandemic through the consumption of lions being sent to China. So we can expect the mobilization of these coalitions and alliances. I love that word. It's a pride word, alliances. So, as women leaders committed to serving planetary health and regeneration, we need to remember just two things. Firstly, Mother Nature is on our side. Secondly, love is the greatest force. Mother Nature is pure love, but she is also pure force. And like a lioness mother who will no longer allow her children, all her beloved species, to be destroyed, confined, consumed, tortured, and eradicated by humanity, she will increasingly raise the intensity of her fierce responses to our arrogance and ignorance. COVID-19 is a gentle reminder that she is in the process of reclaiming her dominion. We need to recognize that our mother is no longer prepared to be wounded by humanity's failings. And as Gaia raises her own frequency, so humanity has only one choice: to raise with her or be erased. All conservation issues today are global issues. If Brazil loses its rainforests, Earth has lost her lungs. If South Africa loses its white lions, humanity has lost our heart. Emerging from the corona initiation, we are all experiencing the power of a global consciousness shift. Astrologically, we stand at the dawn of the Leo Aquarius age right now. And with a sense of impeccable divine timing, we need to recognize that a lion-hearted movement is rising, a groundswell of consciousness that is more than mindfulness. It is more than heartfulness. What is called for now is lion-heartedness, that quality of fearlessness inspired by love and respect for our natural world that enables us to transform our human world. It makes us unstoppable. It grants us the ability to stand up and take down governing structures that are killing our planet, and thereby restore right relationship with nature. This is the forging of the leonine human, the lion-hearted leader who serves planetary regeneration, just as lions and lionesses harmony in their ecosystem. So the role of lion-hearted women is to serve Mother Earth as a sacred inheritance, and the role of lion-hearted men is to serve Mother Earth as a sacred inheritance. Lion-hearted women cannot achieve this without lion-hearted men. And as humanity rises at the dawning of the Leo Aquarius age, there is only one united goal for human leadership, unified through the one lion heart: ecocentric service to Gaia. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Linda Tucker. Thank you for your work, your love, and a particular thank you for your passion, Linda Tucker. So now we're going to hear from Mahnaz Afkhami. Mahnaz is originally from Iran. She's the president and founder of the Women's Learning Partnership, which is in 20 countries. She's the executive director of the Foundation for Iranian Studies. She was the former Minister of Women's Affairs in Iran pre-revolution, and she's lived in exile in the United States since 1979. She speaks to us from Washington, D.C. Mahnaz Afkhami.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And thanks everybody for these wonderful words. And I just want to remind us that this moment in May 2020 was supposed to be celebrated by women around the world as a anniversary, the 25th anniversary of the Beijing UN Conference on Women. And that conference was one in which 35,000 women participated from around the world, the largest conference ever. And they came up with the governments, 180 governments, with something called the Platform for Action, which had 12 areas of emphasis, mostly on women and much on the environment and the violence and the war and so forth. That platform is as valid today, post-pandemic, as it was at the time. And it's interesting that we are now holding this gathering, which is, of course, affected by the horrid events of the pandemic, but at the same time, it is giving us an opportunity that we probably didn't feel had there not been this tragedy. And we're gathering together in new ways. We're rethinking in serious, fundamental ways, and that is what we really need. When Jim said that his wish was to have women leading, I thought, wonderful, how great, and the advocacy work that women have done for decades and the awareness raising has worked. And well, of course, Jim is not an ordinary person, but even ordinary person across the world share that. But what we need to do really, and I will reflect here, the experience of Women's Learning Partnership, which is, as Lynn mentioned, a partnership of 20 autonomous organizations from around the world that work together and make decisions together. And they all work in 60 countries in 30 languages. The main, what I say is what we have come to together for the last 20 years of communication. We think that women's aspirations on the 5 continents where we work are really very much the same. Everybody wants what would be summarized in the Declaration of Human Rights. But how we reach it has to be contextualized to the culture and circumstances of each of these peoples and societies. So what we need to do now in this very strong awakening period is to try to revisit our vision of what happens if women are leading, which we hope they do. Women have been 50% of the population. That has very little to do with the world we have inherited. But it's not enough for us to reach for equality. We really want to be making a vision for the entire population. That is, we want not 50-50, we want 100%. inclusion in 100% of the decisions that affect our lives. And how do we do that is to change the foundational ways of interacting that has brought us to this misery. That is, instead of acquisitive, the financial, material focused, power-based and power top-down hierarchical way of decision-making, we have to come to a way of decision-making which changes the foundations, the architecture of human relationships. And the other way has been what we call it patriarchal decision-making, has been there across the world for centuries. And to change that is not easy, but we have heard very good lessons. So we are in a position to do that changing and to do it together. We can't do it also, we have learned, we can't do it in silos. We are interested in this topic or the other topic or some other. All of the oppressions are there. All of the abuses are there. They all have to be changed. But unless we change the architecture of human relationships, the way people make decisions from family all the way up, we will not be able to do the kind of change that is really substantial and long-lasting. And I will end by saying that in order to do that, we as individuals will have to change ourselves, because we have been collaborating in sustaining the culture of patriarchy. We have been the people who have mostly had more to do with educating the next generation than the other half. So we have to change ourselves. We have to engage in decision-making that is inclusive, respect-based and dialogical and horizontal and involves everyone. And that the power is not the power to tell people what to do, whether it's in education, religion, economics, or politics, but on how to work together to make our vision real. So this is the work of the group that I represent to you, and it's been working so far. We're 10 people in Washington, but we're working in 30 languages because people on the ground are doing it. If we come together with the kind of vision that will change that architecture, I have no doubt that in a blinking of an eye, what one would think, Jim's dream will come true. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahnaz Afkhami from Women's Learning Partnership. Thank you for all the years and years and years and decades of work that you've done for women everywhere in this world. Thank you so much. Our final speaker is Dr., I like calling her that, Hafsat Abiola Costello. And I've known Hafsat for many, many years. She is the executive president of Women in Africa, which is a huge initiative that is an economic development platform to support leading and high potential African women. She's also the founder of Curator Institute for Nigerian Democracy, which she founded in the name of her mother, who was assassinated. Also, her father was assassinated in Nigeria many years ago. She started the China-Africa Bridge. She has received many awards, and she is a treasure. She's from Nigeria originally. She now lives in Brussels. Hafsat Abiola.
Myself. So Lynn, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Normally I just speak, but because we have such a time constraint, I wrote something down. But before I share what I wrote, I just want to say that we created Women in Africa, and we're building the organization because of an African saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And we felt that we needed to provide a platform for the brave and incredible women across Africa to go far on behalf of the continent and to re-engage the world for a better way to engage with us in Africa. And now we have about 8,000 women entrepreneurs that are members in 54 countries, and we continue to grow. So what I wrote down is not about Africa, it's a general statement. So as far as we can tell, our planet is the only one that can support life. Over 3 billion years of exchange of energy from the sun and other stars in the galaxy with this small planet has led to our being here. First found in Africa, the human race moved all over the world, separated for a time by shifting tectonic plates and the seas. We finally came back together most recently, just over 400 years ago. So much of our rediscovering of ourselves has unfortunately been about establishing a pecking order. When we're not at war, we're ensuring that the weak get less and the strong get more. Our histories are different takes on this old story, whether we speak about patriarchy, slavery, colonization, or the current neoliberal order. And for all our declarations, the wealth differential between rich and poor territories gets worse with every century that passes. From 3-1 in the 17th century, when the Portuguese first landed in Africa, it is now 80-1 today. Surely the universe did not facilitate our evolution to find out who is best. If there is any positive about COVID-19, it is that it has forced all of us to wake up to the fact that we've been fighting the wrong fight. It shows us, as nothing before has done, that a system that makes profit its reason to exist enslaves all mankind and now threatens all life as we know it. Faced with our common vulnerability, is the question not how do we make humane our humanity? Now 4.5 billion years old, the earth finally has human beings in every corner, connected and awakened. It has taken so long for us to arrive at this time. From the bowels of the world, from the depths of the sea, the great heights of the skies, well beyond the highest mountain peaks. Echoing across the great distance of the sun and the moon, the earth looks on and asks, what is this human race? By our actions now, do we answer? And I want to leave also for all my sisters a poem I wrote called My Sisters. I also have one for my brothers, but because of time, I won't be able to share that. It says, my sisters, through all that you have faced, the dangers, the lack of support, the rejection, you've remained unbowed. I bow to you. On the path that you've chosen to care enough to work for much needed change, in spite of the lonely road, the bleak prospects, you've remained committed. I commend you. For the way that you move in this flawed world, always looking out for others, whether or not you had someone look out for you. You've remained your sister's keeper. I salute you. At last, a new world beckons. You, me, all of us together are called to usher it in. You may stumble, I may fall, but if we stand side by side, we will rise to this task as one. I count on you. Thank you.
Exquisite. Thank you, Hafsat Abiola Costello. Thank you so much. And that is our final speaker in the women's opening panel. Just to remind you, this is the opening of days and days and days of women's panels that'll go much deeper than these beautiful opening statements. This is like a smorgasbord of beautiful sisterhood coming from all these different countries and from different perspectives, but our message is the same. It is to bring forth the emergence of the feminine, give women their place in the world now, knowing that that insight that Jim had to open the Humanity Rising Summit with an opening circle of women is a brilliant stroke of genius, in my opinion, and I think we would all say that. At the same time, to have the respect for both wings of the bird of humanity, the masculine wing and the feminine wing, and may they both extend in a way that we're in balance rather than off balance. May we all fully express our gifts now, and may we use the COVID-19 incredible disruption, pause, cleanse that it is, to take an evolutionary leap, all of us, men and women, into the reimagined, recreated, regenerative future we all dream of. So thank you so much, everybody. Over to Jim Garrison, our remarkable, wise, intelligent convener.
Who lucked out and got the right answer. So before we go to our final closing meditation, everyone, I want to thank the panel. Thank you, Lynne. And I want to especially thank Lisette Schudemacher. It was Lisette about 6 weeks ago that sent me an email proposing this idea. And so I just want to acknowledge you, Lisette, and thank you for your extraordinary inspiration, because that's what catalyzed everything that we're now doing. And I have understood from our tech people that we're being live streamed not only on Facebook, but 50 organizations around the world are live streaming this session. So we're going out to tens of thousands of people right now with a very clear, very important message. As Lynne said, over the next 9 days now, we're going to listen to Circles of Women. Tomorrow, again, every day between 5 and 7 p.m. Central European time. Tomorrow, Osprey, Orielle Lake will be convening a panel of Indigenous women on the front lines of climate justice and the COVID-19 pandemic. We thought it was appropriate, even as we opened with the voice of an Indigenous woman, that we would start the 9 days of circles with Indigenous voices. So tomorrow, 5 to 7 p.m. CET, we'll have our first women's panel. And the links that you have enable you to join any day, 7 days a week, between 5 and 7 p.m. CET, any one of the panels. After the women, we're going to hear for 7 days to the youth, because they need to be empowered in many ways just as radically as the women. And then around the 9th of June, after a dialogue with Charles Eisenstein, we will start, I would say, the business of Humanity Rising. And that is a 10-day discussion, 2 hours a day, about how we can increase our strategic effectiveness to actually make a difference in the post-pandemic world. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate immensely and very profoundly everything that everyone has contributed to making Humanity Rising such an extraordinary inaugural session. And now I'd like to introduce Sheva Carr. She's the co-founder of the Heart Ambassadors. She's been involved with the Heart Math Institute for many, many years. And we are going to begin a practice every day when we start to take a minute and center ourselves in a spirit of gratitude on our hearts. Heart coherence does all kinds of good things to the body and the soul. And so Sheva, I want to welcome you, and she will give us our closing meditation.
Thank you,
everyone.
So much, Jim. Thank you all. Wow. The good news is, whatever genitals we were born with, access to feminine intelligence is everyone's birthright who has a heart. And we can access that by now focusing our attention in the area around the heart. We've received so much richness in communication and information today. And the translation of that information into wisdom and action happens as we bring it home to our own heart, where the lioness heart, as one of the speakers said. And with our focus of attention in the heart or chest area, I invite us together to imagine the breath is flowing in through the heart and out through the heart. a little slower and deeper in the respiratory rhythm of normal activity. If you find it helpful, you could count to 5 as you breathe in. And count to 5 as you breathe out. And with that heart-focused breathing, to activate a feeling of gratitude or appreciation for something you've received in this feast of the last 2.5 hours. And to breathe that gratefulness in through the heart and out through the heart. You may observe subtle changes begin to happen in your body, your emotions, your thought process, as you breathe in through the heart and out through the heart with this appreciative feeling. Over 1,400 things change in our bodies the moment we activate this in the heart center, including the part of our brain that's perceiving our reality and responding to it, including what the whole panel of today has pointed to, the harmonization of the heart and brain working together as a team in measurable ways that we've published in research. But beyond that, I'm coming to you from the old growth giant redwood forest. And in addition to all the actions we take to save the environment and restore and renew it, when you radiate this gratitude as you breathe in through the heart and broadcast your appreciation out through the heart with your out breath, you are literally changing the electromagnetic field around you. We are not in the environment. We are feeding the field of the environment with every breath and every choice of focus. And when we breathe gratitude and appreciation in through the heart and out through the heart, it feeds the field with coherent electromagnetic information that benefits all life and all creation. So in addition to our actions to restore and renew nature, we can breathe our love for and gratitude for nature in through the heart and out through the heart. And that human nature of love also feeds the field of a new world and a new environment, a renewed environment. This heart-focused breath of gratitude and appreciation also activates access to your intuitive guidance system. So as we put a bookmark in this chapter of the opening ceremony of Humanity Rising, I invite you to pause and listen to the guide inside you, your own heart's intuitive intelligence, on how you can live into this day as a steward of the human nature of love and to feed the field with renewal and restoration through your appreciation. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Sheva. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you for lifting Humanity Rising off the ground. Every day, 7 days a week, as long as the pandemic unfolds and beyond, we'll be convening this space for dialogue in which all of you can participate. Bye for now. God bless you, and we'll see you again soon.